Okay, so in this video, I would like to talk about cell communication and signal transduction pathways. When I grade my students' work, their writings, their FRQs, there's a couple key words that I feel are common sources of confusion. So I kind of wanted to simplify certain vocabulary words that you may come across. So when we look at cell communication, basically we're dealing with signaling molecules. Now the signaling molecule is also called a ligand. Now we can have we can have two kinds of ligands. We have the ones that are like protein based, or we have like a lipid based ligand. And they have different receptors, right? So when we look at the big idea in cell communication is our bodies and organisms and cells use these signaling molecules in order to communicate, to bring about cell responses. So there are 3 steps in cell communication. We have our first step, which is going to be reception. And then our second step will be transduction. And then our third step is a cell response. Now, when we look at our signaling molecules and our ligand, so let's talk first about these signaling molecules. Our 2 categories, when I said that it's protein-based versus a lipid-based ligand, if it's a protein-based, sometimes it could be referenced as a hydrophilic ligand. If it's a hydrophilic ligand, hydrophilic means water-loving. And that is a clue that that ligand is going to attach to a membrane-bound protein receptor. So when we talk about ligands attaching to receptors, we have 2 kinds of receptors. You can have a protein receptor located within the cell membrane, or the receptor can be within the cell, like cytoplasm, or even within the nucleus. So if a ligand is hydrophilic, it will not be able to cross through by diffusion through this nonpolar center, because hydrophilic is going to repel the nonpolar region of the cell membrane. Therefore, this ligand cannot diffuse through if it is a protein-based ligand. Therefore, in order for that ligand to actually communicate, it's going to attach to a protein receptor. So, when we talk about this, this protein receptor is a transmembrane protein. When you see the words, let me write this down somewhere else. So a transmembrane protein represents, so if this is the cell membrane, that is representing a protein that spans the membrane. So it's located within the cell membrane, like we see in this picture here. This receptor, this is also a protein receptor, but it is not a transmembrane protein receptor. It is freely floating in the cytoplasm or in the nucleus, okay? So sometimes if a ligand is described as hydrophilic, you know it's a protein-based ligand and will attach on the surface of a cell membrane. Sometimes they can be called peptide-based hormones. So if you see the word like a peptide hormone, that is also referencing a protein-based ligand that will attach to a transmembrane protein receptor. And yeah, so I just wanted to make sure that if you were reading a question about cell communication and they say like a hydrophilic peptide hormone, that seems overwhelming, like a lot of big words, but really that just means that it cannot diffuse through the lipid bilayer because it cannot go through this hydrophobic region of the cell membrane. And therefore, to pass its message on, it will need to attach to a transmembrane protein receptor. So, the second type of ligand are your lipid-based ligands. And oftentimes, these are going to be your steroid hormones. Now, a lipid can diffuse through the lipid bilayer, and a lipid or a steroid-based hormone will have an intracellular. Intra means inside. Intracellular protein receptor to receive that ligand or that message to bring about a cell response. Okay. Now the other thing that I think I've seen confusion in my students is when we talk about, so I'm going to draw two lines here, and then here, let's make this like a G protein, for example. Or we could even have a tyrosine kinase type of, these two lines represent my double lipid bilayer. Okay, so that's my lipid bilayer. So if we are talking about a transmembrane protein, that means it spans the membrane. Now, in word problems, whether it's an FRQ or a multiple choice, sometimes they describe different regions of these proteins. And so when we look at how the different areas can be described, actually I'm going to hit pause and get some colorful pens. I'll be right back. Okay, so when I look at the different regions, now the whole thing is a protein, but this top part here that I've shaded in pink, this part is outside of the cell. This is where your ligand is going to attach, or the signaling molecule. So this is the region where the ligand attaches, and this is the extracellular domain. Now, domain kind of just means like the region of the receptor that is extracellular or outside. Extracellular means outside of the cell. So while this, like if you remember, a protein has your primary structure, and then your secondary structure, and then the tertiary structure, and then possibly a quaternary structure. So as a protein folds up, there will be some regions that fall outside of the cell. Then you have a second area that is going to be inside the cell, right? So this area of the protein receptor that falls inside of the cell is an intracellular domain. Okay, so that part is intracellular. Now this is the part that's going to be involved with activating your second messengers, like cyclic AMP. So the intracellular domain will activate your second messengers to keep the message going. Then you have the part of the protein that is going to actually span the actual membrane. So this region in green right here, as you can imagine, this is the part, if I go back to my previous picture, it's this region of the protein receptor right here that falls within that non-polar area of the cell membrane. So this is called your, the part that spans the membrane, or the transmembrane region. I think that's what it's called. So here, if I'm wrong on this, I'll let you know, okay? So anyway, so here you have your extracellular domain and your intracellular domain. Now, why this matters is because if you connect cell communication to other units and other ideas. Now, our protein is like the sequence of our amino acids, and how our protein folds up is based on the sequence of our DNA, and then we have that messenger RNA, and then our protein. So if a mutation occurs in the DNA, that could mean a different mRNA sequence and a different folding up of that protein. So if we talk about a mutation occurring in this extracellular domain of the receptor protein, sorry, I don't know what happened there, but if a mutation happened in this extracellular domain of the protein, now that ligand may not be able to attach. For example, if, let's say that this area right here, like maybe this area, oh, that pen doesn't work. Maybe right here had like a non-polar, or we can even make it a polar amino acid, and then a mutation occurs and now it's a non-polar amino acid. Well, maybe now that signaling molecule won't be as, won't be able to attach. Now, if you have a mutation occur in that transmembrane region, that might affect passing the message on and starting the activation of a second messenger. So when we look at our 3 steps in cell communication, where we start out with the ligand attaching, if it's a hydrophilic or a peptide hormone, a protein-based hormone, or a water-soluble hormone, something that cannot diffuse across, well, then it has to attach. Man, I don't know what's happening. Sorry. It has to attach to the extracellular portion of the receptor protein. Then it'll activate what we call like relay proteins, and I have lots of videos on cell communication that I would recommend watching. But basically, like if you have other proteins become activated that then lead to like a second messenger, in your transduction pathway, you use protein kinases that are going to like phosphorylate and activate other proteins along the transduction like phosphorylation cascade. Now, in this step, the message becomes amplified. Amplified means increased. So here, like the message is increasing within the cell. And then ultimately, it'll bring about a cell response. Now, sometimes that cell response might be to activate transcription factors to turn on gene expression, or the cell response might be to activate an enzyme. The internet is, full of different examples. But basically, when we look at cell communication using protein-based ligands, that first message, because it can't diffuse across, relies on a second messenger to keep the message going within the cell to bring about that cell response. Now, this video really was, I just really wanted to focus on the vocabulary on like a hydrophilic peptide hormone, steroid hormones, and then these words down here with the extracellular, intracellular domains and the transmembrane region. I do recall an FRQ in my school year where you had to like identify a mutation in a certain region of the protein, and a lot of my students were not able to do that. And I feel like it's because they didn't know what these different vocabulary words meant. Okay, so hopefully those big words are cleared up for you, and yeah, I'll have other videos on cell communication, but I thought those words were important.